The black car stopped in front of the Golden Hall and Margaret Chun stepped out in her shiny silver dress. She looked around at the big building with its tall windows and gold decorations. Tonight was the Children's Hospital Charity Gala and she was the main performer. People would pay thousands of dollars to hear her play piano, and she knew it. Margaret walked up the red carpet with her head high and her back straight. She had been playing piano for 30 years and was famous around the world. People called her the best pianist of her time. She had played in the biggest concert halls in New York, London, and Paris. Tonight would be easy for her. Inside the hall, rich people in expensive clothes talked and laughed while holding wine glasses. The women wore diamonds and pearls. The men wore black suits that cost more than most people make in a month. Margaret smiled as she walked through the crowd. These were her people. These were the people who understood real music and real art. She stopped at the bar and ordered champagne. The young man serving drinks recognized her right away. "Miss Chun, it's such an honor to have you here tonight," he said with excitement in his voice. Margaret smiled but did not really look at him. She was used to people being excited to meet her. "I heard you're playing Rachmaninoff tonight," said a woman in a red dress who came up to Margaret. "I can't wait to hear it. I've been following your career for years." "Yes, Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2, Margaret replied, taking a sip of her champagne. "It's a difficult piece, but I've mastered it completely. Not many pianists can play it the way I do." As Margaret talked with the wealthy guests, she noticed some people on the small side stage. They looked like regular people, not professional musicians. A young man with a guitar was trying to tune it. A woman with a violin looked nervous as she practiced. Margaret shook her head and made a face of disgust. "Who are those people?" she asked the woman in the red dress. "Oh, those are volunteers from the hospital. They're performing before your main concert?" "The hospital likes to include the staff in the charity events. It's sweet, really." Margaret laughed in a way that was not kind. "Sweet? They're going to ruin the whole evening. People pay good money to hear real music, not some amateur hour performance. This is supposed to be a classy event." The woman in the red dress looked uncomfortable. "Well, I think it's nice that they want to contribute. They work so hard at the hospital. Contributing would be staying in the background and letting real artists do what they do best," Margaret said, her voice getting louder. "I don't understand why they let just anyone perform at these events. There should be standards." At that moment, a man in a black suit walked over to them. He was the event organizer. "Miss Chun, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're so grateful for your donation of time and talent." "Of course," Margaret said, changing her tone to sound more pleasant. "I always support good causes. Though I do hope the other performances won't go on too long. People are really here to hear professional music." The organizer nodded quickly. "Don't worry, the volunteer performances are very short. Just a few songs, then we'll have dinner and your main performance after that." Margaret looked toward the back of the hall where the cheaper tables were. She saw hospital workers and their families sitting there. They looked out of place in their simple clothes. Some of them seemed nervous, like they didn't belong in such a fancy place. "I suppose we all have to make sacrifices for charity," Margaret said to herself. But loud enough for others to hear. At one of the back tables, Elena Rodriguez sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a dark blue dress that she had owned for many years. It was clean and neat but not expensive. She felt strange being at such a fancy event. She had been invited because she had worked at the Children's Hospital for 20 years, but she still felt like she didn't belong. Elena watched the rich people talk and laugh. They seemed so confident and comfortable. She wished she could feel that way. She had been excited when she got the invitation, but now she wondered if she should have stayed home. The volunteer musicians on the side stage finished their sound. Check. Elena knew some of them. There was David from the lab, Sarah from the cafeteria, and Mike from security. They were all good people who worked hard every day. Elena felt proud that they were brave enough to perform in front of all these important people. Margaret continued talking to the guests around her. She told them about her recent concert tour and her new recording. She enjoyed being the center of attention. These people understood how important she was. They knew that she was special and talented. I started playing piano when I was 4 years old, Margaret told a group of admirers. My parents knew right away that I had a gift. Not everyone can do what I do. It takes natural talent that you're born with. The people around her nodded and smiled. They seemed impressed by everything she said. Margaret felt good about herself. This was how things should be. Important people treating her like the artist she was. Elena looked toward the grand piano. On the main stage, it was beautiful and black and shiny. She had not seen a piano like that in a long time. For just a moment, she imagined herself sitting at the bench and playing, but she quickly pushed that thought away. That was not her life anymore. The event organizer went up to the microphone to start the evening. He welcomed everyone and thanked them for coming to support the children's hospital. He talked about how important the hospital was and how much good work they did. Then he introduced the volunteer performers. Elena clapped along with everyone else as David, Sarah, and Mike took the stage. They played simple songs that everyone knew. They were not perfect, but they played with heart. Elena could see how much it meant to them to be part of the event. Margaret rolled her eyes as she listened. She tapped her foot impatiently and checked her watch. She wanted this part of the evening to be over so she could show everyone what real music sounded like. Soon, she thought, everyone would remember why they really came here tonight. The volunteer performers finished their songs and everyone clapped politely. Margaret clapped too, but her smile was fake. She was glad that part of the evening was over. Now people could focus on real music and real talent, the guests started, moving around the room again, talking and drinking while they waited for dinner to be served. Margaret walked through the crowd, enjoying the compliments and attention. Everyone wanted to talk to her and tell her how excited they were for her performance. "Miss Chun, I've been to all your concerts in the city," said an older man with gray hair. "You're absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to hear you play tonight." Margaret smiled and nodded. "Thank you. I always give my best performance. Music is my life and I take it very seriously." As she talked to more people, Margaret noticed that her champagne glass was empty. She looked around for a waiter, but didn't see one nearby. Then she saw Elena sitting alone at a table in the back. Elena was wearing a simple dark dress and looked like she was trying to stay out of everyone's way. Margaret walked over to Elena's table. She didn't really look at Elena's face, just saw the simple dress and the way she sat quietly. Margaret assumed Elena must be one of the serving staff. "Excuse me," Margaret said in a commanding voice. "Could you bring me another glass of champagne? The white one, not the red." Elena looked up surprised. She had been watching the people around the room and thinking about how different their lives must be from hers. "I'm sorry, but I'm not working tonight. I'm a guest here." Margaret's eyebrows went up. She looked at Elena more carefully now, taking in her simple dress and her work-worn hands. "A guest?" Margaret repeated, and she started to smile in a way that was not nice. "How interesting, and what exactly do you do?" Elena felt uncomfortable, but she answered politely, "I work at the children's hospital. I've been there for 20 years. They invited me to the gala because of my service." Margaret's smile got bigger, and she started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made other people feel small. A hospital worker. How delightfully humble. She said the word humble like it was something bad. Some of the people at nearby tables started to look over at them. They could hear Margaret's voice getting louder, and they sensed that something was happening. "What do you do at the hospital exactly?" Margaret asked, still smiling in that mean way. Elena wished she could disappear. She could feel people staring at them. "I'm a janitor. I clean the floors and the rooms." Margaret laughed even louder now. "A janitor. Oh, this is perfect. So you're the one who cleans up after everyone else." She turned slightly so that more people could hear her. "I suppose everyone needs their place in society, don't they? Some of us create beauty and art that lifts the human spirit. Others clean up after it." Elena felt her face get hot. She had been proud of her work at the hospital for 20 years. She had helped keep the place clean and safe for sick children. She had comforted worried parents and worked long hours without complaint. But now Margaret was making her feel ashamed of her job. There's nothing wrong with honest work, Elena said quietly. Oh, of course not, Margaret said, but her tone showed she didn't really mean it. Everyone can't be talented. Everyone can't be special. Someone has to do the simple jobs for the simple people. More people were listening now. Some of them looked embarrassed by what Margaret was saying. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. The woman in the red dress who had been talking to Margaret earlier looked horrified. Margaret, maybe we should go get some dinner, the woman said, trying to end the conversation, but Margaret was enjoying herself too much to stop. She had found someone she could feel superior to, and she wanted everyone to see the difference between them. No, I'm having a fascinating conversation with this lovely woman. Tell me, what's it like to spend your days mopping floors and emptying trash cans? It must be so fulfilling. Elena's hands were shaking a little, but she kept them folded in her lap. She didn't want to cause a scene. She just wanted Margaret to leave her alone so she could go back to being invisible. I help take care of sick children, Elena said, her voice still quiet but with a little strength in it. I think that's important work, Margaret laughed again. Oh, I'm sure you think it's important. But let's be honest, anyone can push a mop around. What you do doesn't require any special skill or talent. It's not like you're contributing anything unique to the world. The people around them were getting more uncomfortable. Some of them knew that Margaret was being cruel, but they didn't know how to stop her. Elena was just a hospital worker, and Margaret was a famous pianist. It didn't seem like their place to interfere. I imagine your life is quite simple, Margaret continued. You wake up, you clean things, you go home. No creativity, no art, no beauty. Just the same routine every day. How do you stand it? Elena looked down at her hands. They were not soft and smooth like Margaret's hands. They were rough from years of work, but they were honest hands. They had cleaned up after sick children and helped make their world a little bit better. My life might be simple, Elena said, but it has meaning. Margaret made a sound like she was disappointed. Meaning? What meaning could there possibly be in such basic work? You're just doing what anyone could do. There's nothing special about it. The woman in the red dress tried again to pull Margaret away. Margaret, please, people are staring. Let them stare, Margaret said. I'm just having a conversation with this charming woman about the realities of life. Not everyone can be extraordinary. Most people are just ordinary, doing ordinary things. Elena felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not let this woman see her cry. She had dealt with difficult people before. She had handled rude doctors and angry family members. But this was different. This was someone attacking her entire life and everything she had worked for. I should go, Elena said, starting to stand up. Oh, don't leave on my account, Margaret said sweetly. I was just getting to know you. I'm always interested in meeting people from all walks of life. But Elena could hear the fake sweetness in Margaret's voice. She knew that Margaret was enjoying making her feel small and worthless. Elena sat back down because she didn't want to look like she was running away, even though that's exactly what she wanted to do. Margaret was having too much fun to stop now. She could see that Elena was upset, and that made her feel powerful. She liked showing everyone the difference between someone important like herself and someone ordinary like Elena. You know what I find most interesting, Margaret said, speaking loud enough for the people at nearby tables to hear, is how some people think they understand art and music just because they listen to it. But there's such a big difference between appreciating something and actually being able to create it. Elena didn't say anything. She just sat there with her hands folded, hoping that Margaret would get bored and leave her alone. But Margaret was enjoying the attention too much to stop. I've spent my entire life mastering the piano. I've studied with the greatest teachers in the world. I've performed in the most prestigious concert halls. That's what real musicianship looks like. Margaret gestured toward herself as she spoke. The woman in the red dress looked around nervously. Other guests were starting to gather around, drawn by Margaret's loud voice. Some of them looked curious, others looked uncomfortable. But nobody was trying to stop Margaret from talking. "Of course, I don't expect everyone to understand what it takes to be a real artist," Margaret continued. "Most people just hear some notes and think that's all there is to it. They don't realize the years of practice, the dedication, the natural talent that's required." Elena glanced toward the grand piano on the main stage. It sat there waiting, beautiful and silent. For just a moment she remembered what it felt like to sit at a piano bench and feel the keys under her fingers. But that was a long time ago. And this was not the time to think about it. Margaret noticed where Elena was looking, and her eyes lit up with a new idea. "Oh my goodness, don't tell me you play piano too," she said, and she started laughing again. "This just gets better and better. Let me guess, you pound out a few simple songs at home and think you're a musician." Elena felt her face get hot again. "I used to play a little, yes, a little," Margaret repeated, turning to the crowd that had gathered around them. "Did you hear that, everyone? Our cleaning lady here thinks she's a pianist too. This is absolutely precious." Some of the people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. They could see that Margaret was being mean, but they didn't know what to do about it. Elena was just a hospital worker, and Margaret was famous. It seemed like Margaret had the right to say whatever she wanted. "What kind of music do you play?" Margaret asked, her voice dripping with fake interest. "Chopsticks? Mary Had a Little Lamb? I'm sure it's quite impressive for someone with your background." Elena wanted to disappear. She wanted to get up and leave the gala and never come back. But something inside her wouldn't let her run away. She had worked hard her whole life, and she deserved to be treated with respect, even if she was just a janitor. "I used to play classical music," Elena said quietly. Margaret's laughter got even louder. "Classical music? Oh, this is too much. You probably think playing some simple Mozart piece makes you a classical pianist. Let me tell you something, dear. Real classical music requires years of professional training. It's not something you can just pick up as a hobby." The crowd around them was getting bigger. People were whispering to each other and pointing. Elena could feel all their eyes on her. She felt like she was shrinking into her chair. "You know what?" Margaret said, and her voice got very loud and dramatic. "I have a wonderful idea." "Why? Don't you show us all what you can do? I'm sure everyone here would love to hear your interpretation of classical music." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Elena felt her heart start beating faster. She looked around at all the faces staring at her, waiting to see what she would do. "Come on," Margaret said, gesturing toward the grand piano. "Don't be shy. This is a perfect opportunity for you to share your musical talents with all these lovely people. I'm sure they're dying to hear what a hospital janitor sounds like when she plays classical music." The crowd was completely silent now. Everyone was watching Elena and waiting to see if she would accept Margaret's challenge. Elena knew that Margaret was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. Margaret expected her to either refuse and look like a coward or accept and embarrass herself by playing badly. "I don't think that's a good idea," Elena said softly. "Oh, but I think it's a fantastic idea," Margaret said. "Here we are at a charity gala, and you work at the very hospital we're raising money for. It would be so inspiring for everyone to hear you play. Unless, of course, you're afraid that your playing might not be quite as good as you thought." Elena felt trapped. If she said no, Margaret would say she was scared. If she said yes, Margaret expected her to fail and make a fool of herself. Either way, Margaret would win. "I'm not dressed for performing," Elena said, looking down at her simple dress. "Nonsense," Margaret said. "Music is about talent, not about what you wear. Besides, I think your outfit is perfectly appropriate for your level of playing." Some people in the crowd laughed at that comment. Elena felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She had never been so humiliated in her entire life. "Come on, everyone," Margaret said, addressing the crowd like she was the host of a show. Let's encourage our friend here to share her musical gifts with us. I'm sure she has something wonderful to show us." A few people in the crowd started clapping uncertainly. They weren't sure if they should encourage Elena or not. Most of them felt sorry for her, but they also didn't want to go against Margaret. "Please," Margaret said, putting her hand on Elena's shoulder in a way that looked friendly but felt controlling. "I insist. As a professional musician, I would be honored to hear you play. Consider it a masterclass. I can even give you some tips afterward." Elena looked up at Margaret and saw the cruel smile on her face. She knew that Margaret was setting her up to fail. Margaret wanted to prove to everyone that there was a huge difference between real musicians and ordinary people who just thought they could play. "I really don't think this is the right time or place," Elena said. "But this is the perfect time and place," Margaret said. "We're all here together, we have a beautiful piano, and you have the chance to show everyone what you can do. How often does an opportunity like this come along?" Elena's hands were shaking now. She felt like she was in a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Everyone was staring at her, waiting for her to make a decision that would either save her dignity or destroy it completely. Elena sat in her chair for what felt like forever. The whole room was quiet and everyone was staring at her. She could feel Margaret's cruel smile and hear the whispers of the crowd. Her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone could hear. She looked at her hands again. They were shaking a little. These hands had cleaned floors and windows for 20 years. They had scrubbed and mopped and carried heavy buckets. But before that, these same hands had done something else. Something she had almost forgotten about. Elena took a deep breath and slowly stood up. The crowd made a small sound of surprise. Margaret's smile got even bigger because she thought Elena was going to embarrass herself in front of everyone. "Oh, wonderful," Margaret said, clapping her hands together. "This is going to be so entertaining. Everyone, please give our brave volunteer some encouragement." Elena walked toward the grand piano. Each step felt heavy and difficult. She could hear people whispering behind her. Some of them felt sorry for her. Others were curious to see what would happen. A few seemed excited to watch someone fail. When Elena reached the piano, she stood beside it for a moment. The instrument was beautiful and black and shiny. It was much better than any piano she had played in a long time. She ran her finger gently along the smooth wood. "Don't be shy," Margaret called out from behind her. "We're all waiting to hear your classical music." Elena pulled out the piano bench and sat down. She adjusted her simple dress and placed her hands on her lap. The keys were white and black and perfect. She hadn't sat at a piano like this in so many years. For a moment, Elena closed her eyes. She thought about her old life before the hospital, before everything changed. She thought about the feeling of music flowing through her fingers and the joy of creating something beautiful. She thought about who she used to be. When Elena opened her eyes, something had changed. She sat up straighter, and her shaking stopped. She lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The crowd got even quieter, waiting to hear what she would play. Then Elena began. The first notes were soft and careful. She played a simple scale to warm up her fingers. Margaret laughed behind her and said something about how basic it sounded. But Elena wasn't listening to Margaret anymore. She was listening to the music. Elena's fingers began to move faster and more confidently. She wasn't playing chopsticks or Mary Had a Little Lamb. She was playing something much more difficult. The melody was beautiful and complex, with notes that danced and sang and told a story. The crowd stopped whispering. Margaret stopped smiling. Everyone realized that something unexpected was happening. Elena's hands moved across the keys like they belonged there. Her fingers found every note perfectly, even the difficult ones. The music filled the entire room and touched everyone who heard it. It was not simple music, it was not amateur music. It was the music of someone who truly understood what they were doing. As Elena played, she seemed to transform. She was no longer the nervous janitor in the simple dress. She was a musician, an artist, someone who could create beauty with her hands and her heart. The music flowed out of her like water from a spring. The piece she was playing was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, It was one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano music. Most professional pianists had to practice it for months before they could play it well. But Elena played it like she had been born to play it. Her left hand created a strong, steady rhythm while her right hand danced through the melody. The music was sometimes gentle and sometimes powerful. It told a story of love and loss and hope. Everyone in the room could feel the emotions in the music. Margaret stood frozen behind Elena, her mouth open in shock. This was not what she had expected. This was not the embarrassing performance she had planned to watch. This was something incredible. The other guests were just as amazed. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others were holding their breath, afraid to make any sound that might interrupt the beautiful music. Everyone understood that they were witnessing something special. Elena's fingers flew across the keys with perfect technique. She played the fast sections with brilliant speed and the slow sections with deep feeling. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every phrase was shaped with artistic understanding. As the piece continued, Elena seemed to forget about everything else. She forgot about Margaret's cruel words. She forgot about the crowd watching her. She forgot about her simple dress and her work-worn hands. She was lost in the music, connected to something deeper than herself. The music grew more intense and dramatic. Elena's whole body moved with the rhythm as she played. Her face showed the emotions of the music, sometimes peaceful, sometimes passionate, always completely focused on what she was creating. Margaret tried to say something, but no words came out. She had never heard anyone play Chopin like this. Even she, with all her training and experience, could not play this piece with such perfect technique and emotional depth. The other guests were completely mesmerized. They had come to the gala, expecting to hear Margaret's professional performance later in the evening, but this was something even more amazing. This was music that came from the heart and soul, not just from years of practice. Elena played the final section of the piece with incredible power and beauty. Her hands moved with lightning speed through the most difficult passages. The music built to a dramatic climax that filled the entire hall with sound. Then, suddenly, it was over. Elena played the last few notes with perfect timing and feeling. The final chord rang out into the silence and slowly faded away. Elena sat at the piano bench with her hands still on the keys. She was breathing hard from the effort of playing such a difficult piece. For a moment, she looked surprised, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. They were all stunned by what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, one person started to clap, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People were standing up and cheering. Some were crying. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. Elena stood up from the piano bench and looked out at the crowd. She saw faces full of wonder and respect. These were the same people who had been watching her get humiliated just minutes before. Now, they were giving her a standing ovation. Margaret stood in the back of the crowd, her face pale and shocked. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The simple janitor had just played one of the most difficult pieces in classical music better than most professional pianists could play it. The applause went on for several minutes. Elena stood beside the piano, looking overwhelmed by the response. She had not expected this reaction. She had just played music the way she remembered how to play it, the way she had learned so many years ago. People in the crowd were wiping tears from their eyes. They kept clapping, and some of them were calling out things like bravo and incredible and amazing. Elena had never received applause like this before, not even in her old life. Margaret stood frozen in the back of the crowd. Her face was white and her hands were shaking. She could not believe what she had just heard. The woman she had been mocking and humiliating had just given one of the most beautiful piano performances she had ever witnessed. As the applause finally started to die down, an elderly man with white hair pushed through the crowd. He had tears streaming down his face, and he was walking quickly toward Elena. Everyone stepped aside to let him through. "Elena," the old man said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Elena, is it really you?" Elena looked at the man and her eyes grew wide. "Professor Martinez?" she whispered. The old man reached Elena and took her hands in his. "My dear girl, I can't believe it. After all these years, I finally found you." The crowd was watching this reunion with great interest. They could tell that something important was happening, but they didn't understand what it was. Professor Martinez turned to face the crowd, still holding Elena's hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a loud, clear voice, "I would like you to meet Elena Rodriguez, who used to be known as Elena Vasquez. She was one of my most talented students at the conservatory and one of the most promising young pianists I ever taught." A wave of surprise went through the crowd. People started whispering to each other, trying to understand what the professor was saying. "Elena was supposed to have a brilliant career," Professor Martinez continued. "She had already been accepted to perform with several major orchestras. She was going to be a star. But then she disappeared from the music world, and I never knew. What happened to her?" Elena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created such beautiful music. "I had to leave, Professor. My husband got sick and we needed the insurance from the hospital job. I couldn't pursue music anymore." "Your husband?" the professor asked gently. "He had cancer," Elena said quietly. "We had 2 young children and no money for his treatment. The hospital job gave us health insurance and steady pay. I had to take care of my family." The crowd was listening to every word. They were beginning to understand that Elena had given up her musical career to save her family. Margaret felt sick to her stomach as she realized what she had done. "How long did you take care of him?" Professor Martinez asked. 5 years, Elena replied. "He fought hard, but the cancer won. After he died, I stayed at the hospital because the children needed stability. They were so young and had already lost their father. I couldn't take any more risks with our security." "And your children now?" the professor asked. Elena smiled for the first time that evening. "They're both grown up. Maria is a doctor and Carlos is a teacher. They're good people who help others, just like their father wanted." The professor nodded with understanding. "So you gave up everything for your family. That's the most noble thing anyone can do. I don't regret it," Elena said. "My husband was a good man and my children needed me. Music was important to me, but my family was more important." Margaret felt like the floor was disappearing under her feet. She had spent the entire evening mocking a woman who had sacrificed her dreams to save her family. She had called Elena ordinary and talentless, when Elena had actually given up an extraordinary musical career out of love. "But you kept playing?" Professor Martinez asked. "Sometimes," Elena said. "Late at night when I got home from work, I would play on an old keyboard I bought at a garage sale. It helped me remember who I used to be. Music was still part of me, even if I couldn't make it my career anymore." The professor turned to the crowd again. "What you heard tonight was not just beautiful music. It was the sound of a woman who never stopped being an artist, even when life forced her to put her art aside. Elena played with the same passion and skill she had 20 years ago, because real musicianship never leaves you." People in the crowd were crying now. They understood that they had witnessed something much more than a good performance. They had seen someone reconnect with their deepest self after years of sacrifice and hardship. "Elena," said a woman in an expensive dress, "why didn't you ever try to come back to music?" Elena thought for a moment. "I was afraid I wasn't good enough anymore. I thought I had been away too long, and I was comfortable with my life at the hospital. I love helping the families of sick children. It gives my life meaning." Margaret finally found her voice. She pushed through the crowd, her face red with shame. "Elena, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I said terrible things to you. I was cruel and wrong." Elena looked at Margaret with calm eyes. "You didn't know my story, but you also didn't try to learn it. You saw my simple dress and my job, and you decided I was less than you." "I was horrible to you," Margaret said, tears starting to fall. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did." "You don't need to apologize to me," Elena said. "But you should think about why you felt the need to hurt someone you didn't even know." Real artists don't try to make others feel small. They try to lift others up. The crowd was watching this exchange with fascination. They could see that Elena was handling Margaret's apology with grace and wisdom. Music isn't about the stage you perform on or the clothes you wear, Elena continued. It's about the human heart and the courage to share it. I learned more about life's true melody from the families in that hospital than I ever did in concert halls. Professor Martinez stepped forward. Elena, I have a proposal for you. The hospital has been looking for a music therapist to work with the children. Would you be interested in combining your love of music with your love of helping others? Elena's face lit up. That sounds perfect. I could use music to help heal children instead of just entertaining rich people. Margaret felt that comment like a slap, but she knew she deserved it. She had spent her career performing for wealthy audiences while Elena had spent hers serving others. The evening ended with Elena surrounded by admirers and new friends. She had found a way to bring music back into her life while still helping others. Margaret left early, her reputation forever changed. She had learned that true worth isn't measured by fame or status, but by the kindness and courage we show to others. Elena went home that night knowing that her life was about to change again, but this time she wouldn't have to choose between music and meaning. She could have both.